Hello and welcome to This Week in Cannabis Interviews. We have a special guest in studio for you guys this week. He is the Chief Science Officer at Melabis and the founder and president of Development Catalyst. Please welcome to the studio, Alexzander Samuelsson.
Thank you, Jesse. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Happy to have you here. So let's get started where you got started in your journey in the cannabis space. You are a scientist, correct?
Yes.
So how did you begin your journey through science and into the cannabis industry?
Well, actually, I did everything right in university, got good grades, studied hard, volunteered both inside, outside the university, worked inside and outside the university for the Ontario government. Got my Bachelor of Science in Chemistry at Ryerson University in 2014. And I tried for a good year and a half to try and get into the chemical space, but could not really find great success in there. I think I had over 400 applications sent and no interviews. So it was quite a difficult time in my life. And unfortunately, some other things were going on. And I was taking pharmaceuticals, SSRIs, anti-anxiety medication, and balancing it all out with Adderall because I have ADD, anxiety, and depression. So when I went to my father's 50th birthday, he had offered a joint, and he'd offered many times before, but I never really liked cannabis. I tried it a couple times when I was younger. And then for some reason, I just thought, you know what? Yeah, sure, I'll try it. It's my dad's 50th birthday. And it just, really opened me up. It opened up my mind. I was giggly. I was happy again. I felt the emotions that I felt that these pharmaceuticals were actually taking away. And that's not to take away from these pharmaceuticals. They can be a tool for people that need it in a specific time in their life. But for me, it really dampened my emotional state, and cannabis really opened me up. So after that experience, he gave me a doggy bag to go home with. And as a bored out of work chemist with the internet, I just started learning as much as I could about what this was, why it was making me feel the way it was, and how it can help me and benefit me. And that's where I found this huge community online. I had friends that were starting to come out of the woodwork once they found out that I started to use cannabis, and really sort of showed me the ropes and taught me about the culture. And that was really the beginning of my journey into the cannabis space.
So how did you get involved with both Melabis and Development Catalyst as well? And could you talk a little bit about those companies?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me just back up very briefly. So I first started out in the cannabis space, first going to networking events, then going to conferences, really networking with people, getting to know the industry. Then I started to do some contracts, first on the regulatory side, and then in some media stuff with Lyft. Lyft was a good example of that. I eventually came to Next Leaf Solutions, where I did a couple contracts with them, and then their CEO said, "Oh, you gotta join us as a lead chemist." So I came aboard Next Leaf Solutions for about a year and a half. Then I made a tough decision to leave that company just to pursue my own ambitions, and that's what led me to incorporating Development Catalyst, because I really enjoyed the independence of consulting and advising and educating. So that's really where my heart led. So I had incorporated that company in June. And then right after Lyft Toronto, got this great opportunity to go to Uzbekistan, being sponsored by Melabis to help consult with the government there on the difference between cannabis and hemp. Once I went to Uzbekistan and had this very successful consultation process, I was made an offer for the Chief Science Officer position, which honestly I couldn't turn down because they're targeting both Central and South Asia for hemp production.
Interesting. You mentioned Uzbekistan. I haven't heard much before in regards to Uzbekistan in the cannabis space. So what was that journey all about?
Yeah, so Damon Booth is the founder of Melabis, and what they're trying to do is look at different regions that haven't been developed yet and help their government with the information on what is cannabis, what is hemp, and how can their countries and nations benefit from this great resource. So Melabis is targeting hemp cultivation in South and Central Asia, and really they don't want to be, or we want to be, a wholesaler of different products from bulk biomass and crude oils, maybe even down to more refined products down the line. It's just still in startup phase, but we're developing rapidly.
Nice. So you have become known as Alex the Chemist,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is very cool. Could you give like a layman's breakdown when it comes to what it is you do exactly when it comes to chemistry and cannabis for people who might not be so well versed in science, such as myself?
Yeah, so when I was at Nextleaf Solutions, I helped to develop the process of taking the raw biomass and turning it into either distillate oil or maybe some other product. And I actually hold a patent within Nextleaf to basically take out the polars. So when you extract using ethanol or an alcohol-based solution, you have dyes, fats, waxes, lipids, and a whole bunch of other compounds like ketones, aldehydes, sugars, plus the terpenes and cannabinoids that you're looking to extract. One of the things I did most was help to refine those process, make optimizations on each of those steps. And then with the liquid-liquid separation that I helped to develop, that takes out the sugars so you have a cleaner oil at the very end. And the distillate oil is really what you want for infusion products, anything from topicals, vape pens, edibles, gel caps, really anything that you want to infuse, even water solubles. That's the base product.
So in essence, it's taking out all of the undesirable things that are in the cannabis product and leaving just the beneficial effects at the end.
Yeah, so like you don't want any dyes in there unless you want like a crude oil, because some people want to have more of like the plant matter in there for various reasons. But what we were focusing on when I was at Nextleaf was just taking the biomass and going to distillate oil so that you have that base product for pretty much all the infused products that are coming online.
So you have a unique perspective when it comes to the cannabis industry coming from a science and a chemistry background. So what would you say is the most important aspects of science as applied to the cannabis space? Is it these extraction methods or is there other aspects to it as well?
Yeah, well, there's a number of different legs you can take science down. For sure, in the extraction space, you're looking at, how the compounds react to different solvents, what comes out, how you can remediate, take out the unwanteds, and also the thermodynamics of distillation, because it's about 10% of the instrument and 90% the method. So you definitely want to have a good method, and that comes into the optimization based on different scientific principles. But for me, my biggest interest is the chemistry of the plant. So what compounds are in there and how do they react with the body? And the basic first principles of how they react in the body are the receptors. And some of the things I talk about in presentations at conferences are the receptor ligand interactions. So some people may not know, but THC and CBD hit receptors called CB1 and CB2 respectively. And CB1 receptors are mostly located within the brain, and CB2 receptors, although there's some in the brain, are mostly located throughout the body, bone marrow, immune cells, and the gut. There's different parts of where CB2 receptors are found. But there's another class of and whole family of receptors called TRP receptors, which terpenes respond to. So you may be familiar with capsaicin whenever you're eating hot food. So that is a receptor called TRPV1, which is on the tongue, which sensitizes it to your own body heat. So you actually feel like you're burning, or maybe you're getting a chemical burn, but it's really just sensitizing it. Menthol is a really good example of another terpene that will, rather than making you feel hot, it makes you feel colder. So we can already see that these TRP receptors will modulate certain effects within the brain and the body. And when you get that in the bloodstream, we believe that with these receptors, both on the neuron, will help with what's called the entourage effect. So if you take THC just by itself, it will hit the CB1 receptor. But if you take terpenes as well, it will hit the TRP receptors also located on the neuron. And basically, you get a greater of sum of effects parts. So greater than some of the effects, parts of the effects. But essentially, you get a much bigger effect than either one individually.
Right. So I've heard about being able to actually manipulate. Again, excuse my terms because I'm a total layman when it comes to science, but the ability to kind of manipulate the high that you get. And now they're starting to be able to extract and combine different aspects of cannabis so that it can actually control the type of effect that it has on a person's high, if you will. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so there's different cultivars or strains in the cannabis space. So if you have a Jack Herrera, that might affect you differently from a Bubba Kush. And some people would say like, oh, well, maybe indica and sativa. These are typical nomenclatures in the cannabis space. And those are just generally meaning sativa is more energizing and indica is more, sleepy or makes you, shuts you down a little bit more. And the base of that is not only the cannabinoids, but also the terpene profile. And one thing I'm a very big advocate for is for licensed producers and cultivators that have an end product to include not only the THC and CBD levels, but also the terpene levels. Not only what terpenes are in there, but the amounts as well, because that really makes a big difference in the effect that you might get. And one of the things I'm really looking forward to as we sort of evolve in the cannabis space and have more research projects and clinical trials is really narrowing down what formulations will hit will create these different effects for specific people, because you have different genetics than me, so we can actually smoke the same strain, but you may have a different effect than I do. And quite honestly, sometimes I can consume the same strain on different days and have slightly different effects. So it's really a dynamic, and the more that we understand this through science and clinical trials, the more we can narrow down and pin down, and that's really the goal of product development.
That's truly interesting. And you seem very passionate about what you're doing. You're doing a lot of great work in the field. Looking ahead, what do you see your contribution to the cannabis industry? You've already done a lot already, but what are some goals that you have moving forward?
Yeah, so some of my biggest goals are just to educate people, make them aware of what it is they're consuming. When you have the knowledge and you say, I have this strain, this has high pinene, so this is going to help me focus a lot better. That is very empowering for people because we didn't have a lot of the science many years ago, and it was just, my dad says there's either good weed or bad weed. It's like, well, Dad, there's a lot more to it now, and we can really find that. And I've kind of gotten out of the R&D component now. It kind of kills me because I love the science. I love getting my hands dirty in the lab, but I kind of wanted to go a different route and expand globally and just see where that career takes me, because I do have a rare skill set in understanding the science and extraction, and I want to help other companies develop their methods, their SOPs, their products, and also just act as a base or somebody you can go to bounce ideas off of, vet products. And really my passion is very delocalized. So part of the reason why I wanted to incorporate Development Catalyst was to narrow down exactly where I want to go, help a whole bunch of people around the world, and just have good stories to tell.
It's great that your heart's in the right place. That's
Mhm.
awesome. So, the issues surrounding Health Canada and their restrictions of cannabis in a lot of ways, both marketing, promotion, and basically their overall game plan with it, has been criticized by a lot of people. Do you see any restrictions in regards to Health Canada and the regulations that they've put? Have you experienced them yourself as a scientist? And do you think there's anything that needs to change?
Well, I would say that, one thing, I'm very grateful to be in Canada where we do have a legal market. We've just passed the 1 year legalization anniversary. So I'm very proud of our country and our politicians to get this far. However, there's still a lot more work that needs to be done on the regulatory side, helping companies get into this space and not having such high barriers to entry. Because I think it was something like $8 or $9 billion cannabis had added to Canada's GDP. That could be a lot higher. And I really feel that politicians, particularly with this election that is, maybe has just passed after this recording is released, but we didn't hear much in the election about cannabis and how we can support this industry, because it's not just scientists like me or CEOs that are working in this field. It's gardeners, it's janitors, it's electricians, HVAC technicians. It is people that build the walls within the facilities, or painters. Like, this is a huge economic boom. And I feel that with such tough regulations, especially in comparison to the other, quote, vice industries like nicotine or alcohol, where they're allowed to advertise, a kid's soda brand Pop Shop with vodka in it on billboards. Vipe has a downtown location in Vancouver where you can go in and sample products and learn about their products, but you can't even have cannabis advertising in public, or it has to be extremely restricted where you don't really know, you just see the company. So I think that there's a lot of regulations that need to change. With respect to science, once you get an R&D license, it's just a barrier to entry to that. You can pretty much do a lot with that license. particularly in product development or testing out things. So once you have that, it's kind of a sandbox. But like I said, the barrier to entry is extremely high for a lot of people that want to get into it.
Yeah, that's a great take, and I definitely agree in terms of marketing and promotion as well. There's a lot of restrictions put in place that stops companies from growing. Now, you mentioned Uzbekistan earlier. Is there any other places you've been to in the world to consult about cannabis? And what do you think about? Do you think any other countries will end up legalizing it? And if so, which ones are on your radar where that might happen, either just for medical purposes or full recreational legalization?
Well, I think that what we've seen typically is there's a medical regime that comes into place in a nation, and then that's kind of the foot in the door to get recreational cannabis, which I believe in liberalization of cannabis because especially when you compare to say nicotine or alcohol, the harms are vastly reduced, and the addiction potential is not really there as much as these other vice industries. So I think that Ireland is slated to become legal. Mexico, I believe, in the next few weeks or within a week, is going to be legalizing as well. I believe that's actually going to be on October 17th, which coincidentally was our legalization day. And yeah, you see Thailand has just opened up their medical regime. Laos has opened up for hemp cultivation. Really, you're starting to see different nations and countries see the potential of this industry. And this is something that's going global, which is one of the reasons why I wanted to start Development Catalyst and really get out there because there's a whole world to help evolve their industries.
Yeah. So looking forward 5 years, where do you see cannabis worldwide? Do you see a lot of changes taking place? Do you see it being accepted a lot more and maybe less restrictions on it?
Definitely. There is a trend here, and unless there is a hard pullback, you know, the United States could literally start making issues for other countries, as they did during the drug war. That's one of the biggest reasons why cannabis is illegal almost worldwide, because during the drug war, United States had a huge influence in the UN, and then the UN, sort of disseminated different laws, and a lot of pressure politically was put on them so that they wouldn't grow cannabis over there and import into the States. Now that you see the liberalization of cannabis within the States, I think that this is, it's hard to put the genie back in the bottle. And I do see the legalization across the world. And as for the industry, in about 5 years, I think that we're going to, well, hopefully, I would like to see cannabis and alcohol on an even playing field. So if you go to a bar, maybe there's a can of drink in there, about 5 milligrams or 10 milligrams THC in an emulsified way, which when you drink emulsified solutions, particularly nano-encapsulated solutions, it really decreases the titration time. So it's on par with alcohol, where if you drink a beer within 5 minutes, you start to feel it within, that time frame. And if you take an edible, you're sitting around looking at your watch being like, oh, 45 minutes later. But if you emulsify these cannabinoids, you vastly increase the titration time. So it's almost on the mark with alcohol. So I see there are going to be vape lounges, perhaps bars that have cannabis drinks, and a lot of different products that I don't think we will even imagine yet will be on the market. Certainly vape pens will be more advanced, edibles, and hopefully we'll understand more about the science so we can have targeted products, both in the recreational and the medicinal market, because we're only beginning to understand the tip of the iceberg of formulations and how that correlates to specific effects.
Well, that is a great take on it. I do look forward to the day when people can crack a cannabis drink or take an edible or smoke a vape just as readily as alcohol is accepted today. I think that'll become a great thing. It's a great alternative. Sometimes you don't want to have a hangover the next day, right? So that's another thing. I feel like I could talk to you forever. You've got so much insight, but I do want to end on this question. If there's a scientist, somebody who is maybe in school right now who is looking to enter the science field and they're particularly fascinated by the cannabis industry and that aspect of things, what's some advice you would give to a budding scientist who wants to enter the cannabis space?
Okay, so I started from the bottom. Now I'm here, to quote Drake.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think the best way is just use my blueprint, which is get in, talk to people, get on Twitter, get on Instagram, particularly Twitter. There's a huge community. You can add me at Alex the Chemist, and you can see the list of people that I've followed. Follow them and just start watching, and then get involved in the conversation. Go to networking events, go to conferences, reach out to people. And I think that I found that the cannabis community is very different from other industries I've participated in. We want to help each other, and we understand the historical significance. So if you're a young scientist or a young professional of any sort that wants to get in the cannabis space, you want to know who's who, what the companies are, maybe familiarize yourself with a bit of the legislation and the regulations, and get involved in conversations. Because if you're a cool person and you're authentic, then people want to interact with you and they'll want to hear what you have to say. And when they have an opportunity, they say, "Oh, hey, you should talk to Jimmy. He's a go-getter and he gets involved, and he really wants to help and contribute." And it's funny because as I've sort of gotten to the position in the industry that I have about 4,000 followers now on Twitter. I have people contacting me all the time, like, how do you get into the industry? Like, what advice do you have? And the best advice is start talking, get involved, know the people that are participants, because we're all kind of helping each other grow and evolve this industry, both here and abroad.
Great. So we will link your Twitter below, as well as any other social media there, so you guys can go ahead and follow Alex. Thank you so much for being on the program today. I feel like we just scratched the surface, so I do hope we'll have you on a future episode as well.
I'd very much like that. Thank you, Jesse.
Thank you. And thank you, dear viewer, for joining us on This Week in Cannabis interviews. We would love to hear from you. Go ahead and drop us a comment below. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what future episodes you might like to see, and any comments or criticism that you may have. This is This Week in Cannabis interviews, brought to you by Evolve Cannabis Solutions, and we'll see you next time.